Are you ready, Kate? Okay. Thank you for joining us. We're so glad you're here. And we're going to go back to chapter 39 of Genesis and pick up a couple of things that we didn't mention last week and go from there. So please, let's start with the word of prayer. Father and God, we're grateful for a beautiful day today and thankful for the opportunity to gather with your people, to have your word present, not just on our laps, but in our lives. And I pray tonight as we examine this story of Joseph, that the inspiration and encouragement that he provides for us might give us strength for our journey and enable us to have a closer walk with you this week in Jesus' name. Amen. So, chapter 39, and the first thing I want us to cover here is at the very beginning, when Joseph gets down, the Ishmaelites bought him from the brothers, and then they sold him to Potiphar. And we often talk about Potiphar as being a eunuch. However, there's a problem with that. It's there in verse 9. What's the problem? In 39. I mean 39:9. You're right.
His master hasn't held anything from him except from his wife.
He has a wife. Yes. So there's a lot of shenanigans and Olympic-size maneuvers that they try to go around, and someone said, well, there's 3 different kinds of eunuchs, and really Potiphar was the 4th kind. And an easier, simpler explanation is that word that we usually translate as eunuch can also be translated as an officer or an official. And because he was a bodyguard, a prison warden of type, the simpler explanation is he was a former soldier in the Egyptian army that Pharaoh took to work under him to serve to guard not the high criminals, but the white collar criminals. So I only have 2 different sections: the bad people and the really bad people. Yeah. So Potiphar would have been in charge of the bad people, not the really bad people. And I think that works as a better explanation of who he was. And so let's pick this up where we left off. Yes?
One other thing about verse 9. We talked about this last week.
Right.
Reading the verse, it says, "There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you. But then because you are his wife." But then he comes up with this question: how then could I do this great evil and sin against God? Nothing to do with Potiphar and his wife. He's concerned about whether he sins against God.
Yes. he had those reasonings, and God was an important part of the reason that he did not want to succumb to her temptations, because that would have been a sin against God. He's using a word here in the beginning that we're all familiar with when he says sin against God, and that is Yahweh, Jehovah. That word's going to disappear before we end tonight, and it just happens. Now, so let's start up in verse 10 and read through verse 18. Tim, you do read that?
And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by the cloak. She said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house."
All right. Now, two things here that often happen to us in our Christian life that chapter 39 exposes and reminds us that we don't often think clearly about this. When people think of being tempted, they often think about one a major cataclysmic event that just rushes in upon us. And here we are given quite a different glimpse, because verse 10 says what about this temptation?
She was the one being tempted by, for one, I don't know what verse 10 says, but he was really good looking, and she spoke to Joseph day after day.
Day after day after day after day. It wasn't one major event. Satan is much better at bringing temptation along casually, slowly, seemingly insignificantly, until, well, how did I get here? And it's something that happens to all of us. I mean, when you go back and watch, and every noon, Jeannie and I, we sit down and watch Leave It to Beaver. Love that show. You know, the language, the episodes, the content, it's so tame and at the same time entertaining. And Hollywood didn't jump from Leave It to Beaver to John Wick 4 overnight. I mean, I've not seen that. I've heard about it. It's just one gruesome massacre, slaying slasher after another. Hollywood didn't go from Father Knows Best to having a homosexual in every single episode. It was a gradual thing. And that's how he works with temptation. She just didn't pounce on him. Day after day, she brought this up. And then, when she was pretty sure that she had his attention, that's when she made her move in verse 12. And he took off. Now notice, in verse 14, it's there. She doesn't mention him by name, but it's there. Who's responsible for this? Her husband. He brought him in here. It's his fault. What was he thinking? And she makes sure, and I told you before, one of the reasons that God wanted his people, and he's working on this, he hasn't got there yet, but one of the reasons that God wanted his people in Egypt was because they were narrow-minded, they were bigoted, they were racist, and they wanted nothing to do with Hebrews. And do you hear her in verse 12? Does that come out in her comments? Ugh. Of all of the kinds of men to be in this house, it had to have been one of those low-life scumbag Hebrews. Yeah, she has got, and if you could go back there in time, you would see the other servants standing around, and not a one would be nodding their head in agreement, because they know her. They've seen her. They probably have even experienced some of this. And they're not going to say anything because their job's on the line. Yes. So, they don't join in, but they also don't defend Joseph. And so we know from verse 17 that Potiphar finally comes home. Wow. He had no idea when he drove up in his chariot that this was waiting for him. There was no phone call ahead of time warning him, wait till you get home. He just pulls in, walks in, and she hits him. Now, we have a difficult time with this next section, so Joe, read verses 19 through 23, please.
When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. But the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
Yeah. That's because the dungeon that Joseph is put in now is in the basement of Potiphar's house. And certainly, his punishment of Joseph isn't what you would expect. You come home, you find out an alien has tried to rape your wife, and so you put him in minimum security, white collar, where the, not bad guys are. And as soon as he gets down there, he makes him and puts him in charge of the, well, as long as you're here, you might as well do something. I know how good you are at this. God blesses you every place you go. So when we read about, most people just jump to the conclusion what he was angry about. But when you read verse 19, there's a possibility that he's angry for some other reason. What might that be? He knew she was lying. Oh, man. And now, instead of being in the office, doing his books, managing his affairs above ground, he's got to be downstairs. And it's important that Potiphar punishes him to a certain extent. Otherwise, we got chaos. Because all the other guys are going to say, holy mackerel, we don't even have to worry. We can do anything we want. Nothing's going to happen to us. So he's making a show of force. But this word for jail there in verse 20 is a unique word, and it's not the dungeon. And when we get down to chapter 40, you're going to see that he was the captain of the bodyguard, and that's where this is. So everybody is convinced that this was just downstairs in. So there he is. Now, Joseph is a good boy. He tries to do the right thing. He has a gift of administration, and he just cannot help himself. He's just good at it. No matter where he's at, he looks around and he says, well, if you did this, if you did that, if you changed that over, if you put that in charge, if you made it this way, in everything that he suggests, God says, booyah. And it explodes in blessing. Happened, his dad saw it. Dad made him in charge of his brothers. They hated him for it. So he gets in trouble, not of his own. And when one disaster after another happens, sold by his brothers, first they were going to kill him, sold by his brothers, goes down to Egypt, bought by an Egyptian, then lied about, put in prison. What would that do to your perspective on life? Yeah. And cynical is the word that comes to mind. Here, he is a believer in God, and I've had lesser people respond in negative situations who talked about believing in God, turning around saying, I don't anymore. Because if God was real, this wouldn't happen to me. And I'm thinking, really? Your experiences on this planet determine whether or not God is real? Because I'm thinking maybe the creation of the earth is a better determination whether God's real or not. I mean, who could put this together? And where'd they stand when they were putting it together? So, chapter 40. We don't know how long he's been there, but Renee, would you read verses 1 through 8?
Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in his custody, with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams."
The cupbearer, another word that we would grasp would be butler. And one of their very important duties was taste testers. And when I say taste testers, they were not testing to see how it tasted. They were testing to see if it was poisoned. That could be a really short career. Because it would only take one dose. Don't eat it. Then they're gone. I don't know what got him so excited, but he's mad. And, maybe he thought it tasted like poison, or maybe the baker burned his toast, and just day after day, burnt toast. He's sick of it. So he throws him in prison. And it's the same place that Joseph is. Hey, how about that? Now, this cracks me up. Look at verse 7. And think about this. Potiphar has put you in there. You're innocent. And he's punishing you. It could be worse, but it's not good. And then he says, here, take care of these guys. Doesn't that say something about his character? That even given this awful stuff, he continues to serve Potiphar. So this cracks me up, and it has for years and years and years. Look at verse 7 and tell me what in that verse is just paradoxical, ironic, illogical, goofy, nuts, makes no sense at all. He's in the master's house, but right at the bottom, right at the last verse of chapter 7, why are you sad? Yes. Joseph, he's up in the morning making his rounds in prison, and he comes on two prisoners, and he says, hey, what's up? Why are you guys so dejected? Man, you look like you lost your best friend. Because we're in prison? I think of you all the time when I'm going through this. Nicholas, I can't help it, Because I'm sure you wouldn't ever want to try that with one of your charges, hey. What's going on? How come you guys look so depressed? So they're upset because they've had these dreams. And dreams, especially Old Testament, prior to the writing of God's Word, dreams were a way in which God communicated, and people took a lot of meaning into a dream. Anybody remember the dreams they had from the night before? Do you dream in color or black and white? Both. Color? Oh, man. Why am I not surprised? I just, have you ever had the same dream over and over again? Yeah. And I haven't since I married Jeannie, because she's my protector and I don't worry about it anymore. But before I married her, I'd have these horrible dreams about dying. Either a wolf was chasing me, or shortly after I started working at the university in Bowling Green, there was a girl driving a Yugo. Remember those? Driving a Yugo across the Mackinac Bridge. And a wind gust come up and blew her right over that bridge. And they said that when they recovered the car, the imprint of her tennis shoes was in the floorboards of that vehicle. I read that down there in Bowling Green, and from then on, I'd have this dream that my car was going off the bridge, and just before I hit the water, I'd wake up. Whew, I'm so glad I did, because, if I'd have hit the water, I'd have been dead. So these guys have this dream. And that's why they're so melancholy, because nobody can interpret them. And notice, Joseph says, well, why don't you tell me the dream? And his reasoning is what? Yes, he gives all the glory to God. I can't tell you what the dream means, but God can. No, that's not how his dad would have done it. Jacob. He said, I think I could help you out here, but it's going to cost you. I'm going to want more cigarettes. I'm going to want some sort of contraband. What do they call that stuff in prison, where they're hiding it? Contraband? Did I have it right? Don't watch a lot of cop shows. So Joseph, he just says, I'll help. And so here we go. Robin, 9 through 20, please.
So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and as it was budding, the blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and as I put the cup in Pharaoh's hand, then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of his house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me in the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head, and in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered it and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh off of you. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants.
And then finish it out.
Okay, so 20. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him.
Look at verse 14. How does that verse tell us the confidence that Joseph had in God's ability to give him the interpretation? How does that verse do that for us?
When this happens, because I know it's going to, God told me it would, trust Pharaoh for me.
Yes. Because this prisoner is going to be what? Yeah, restored. So you're going to be back to Pharaoh. That is so much confidence. And oftentimes we read over that. He knew so much that God was going to restore this butler. He says, when you get back, tell him about my plight. He's not going to say that about the baker. He does not tell the baker. Just before they lop off your head, would you say something about me, please? He just he just jumps right over that. You know, with numbers, you could have a lot of interpretations with that, couldn't you? 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. But he says 3 days. 3 days. Boy, and that's so much better when you're interpreting a dream that it's going to come true in 3 days than 3 years. That'd be a long time to wait. Not for the baker. Although they'd be sitting there thinking, you know, I think Joseph was full of beans. I don't think he knows what he's talking about at all. So, in verse 16, why does the baker get so excited in talking to Joseph? Yes. And the similarity was what? 3. 3, and it had to do with what? Their job. So the butler, 3 days, and his job is going to have a happy ending. Now, he hasn't told Joseph, the baker hasn't told Joseph his dream yet. But he's thinking to himself, 3 days, my job. Let me tell you my dream. and can you believe verses 18 and 19? What is wrong with Joseph? I didn't think about that angle. I was thinking in terms of having a heart for the baker. Yeah, it's going to be okay. When they take you out of here and put you what looks to be a guillotine, don't even think about it. When they draw out their swords, they're all going to just put them up in a big V, and you're going to walk. It's going to be like a parade. Don't be nervous. No, he just flat out tells them, buddy, you can have your head chopped off. Wow. Is there anything positive about that at all? He always tells the truth. But what about the baker? Is there anything positive in this for the baker? I'm free. One of the commentators said the positive thing is if the baker really believed Joseph, this would be an opportunity for him to get his affairs in order. Get word to his family, I'm going to be dead. So here, combination to my safe. When you pull up my computer, the password is, I got these are my favorite recipes for bread. Very good. Don't use it. So, it came about just like he said. And verse 23. Why? Why wouldn't it be in God's? I mean, what does God want from this guy?
Cupbearer had gone to Pharaoh and said, this guy interpreted the dreams. Pharaoh didn't have a dream to interpret at that time. And he had just said, hey, this isn't an issue with me. Just don't bother me with it.
Yeah.
But later on, when Pharaoh has a dream that nobody can interpret, that's when Joseph is needed.
Boy, Renee, you just answer these questions like you've been through this Bible study before. Man, what a memory. Okay, absolutely. If the butler would have spoken to Pharaoh, and he would have been in a very good mood, and Pharaoh would have released Joseph, if he's free and clear, he's not staying. He's not staying in Egypt. He's not from Egypt. Only bad things have happened while he's been here in Egypt. So he's getting out of Dodge. And if he's left, then when Pharaoh has the dream, he's not going to be there. And that's not what God wanted. Kim, chapter 41, verses 1 through 9. 1 through 8, 1 through 8.
At the end of 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second dream, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears thin and scorched by the east wind sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh.
I think that part of Joseph being in prison was an answer to his prayer. Knowing his character and the situation that he found himself in prior to chapter 40, I think when that wife of Potiphar's was after him day after day after day, I think Joseph prayed about that. I can even imagine Joseph saying, God, please, please rescue me from this situation. I mean, that would have to be horrible, wouldn't it? Because he was a Hebrew. Yes, Potiphar put a lot of faith in him, but still there's that ethnic thing. There's a difference in cultures. How much could Joseph trust Potiphar with such volatile information? Hey, boss, your wife won't leave me alone. Hey, boss, your wife just keeps propositioning me. I'm not sure that you would think that you could trust your boss with that information, but you could trust God. And so I think that he said, God, deliver me. And God did. He put Joseph someplace where she couldn't get to him. And as awful as that appears, there must have been a certain sense of relief in knowing that you could go about your whole day and not have her lurking around, because she wasn't. Sometimes when God answers our prayers, it's not the answer we were anticipating. Isn't that right? Oh, man. And God, who loves us dearly, has such an amazing sense of humor that if he knows we're not going to be harmed by it, he can answer prayers that just make our heads spin and him smile. And I've related over and over. I talked to everybody about it. Last fall, I had made mention of the fact that I never, ever see a deer with horns on my farm. So, before hunting season, I had said from the pulpit, I'm not even buying a buck license this year. There's no reason to. I never see a buck. And the second day, sitting in my blind, I wasn't even expecting to see a deer, so my gun's way over in the corner. I have no license. And the biggest buck ever to set foot on my farm walked up to my blind 15 feet from me and looked in the window. And I swear he smiled. I was smiling. In fact, God and I were having the best conversation. I said, oh, God, that is a good one. You are so incredibly funny that you would do this to me. And, oh, it was just such a moment. God has got such a great sense of humor. And yes, it could have been worse. It could have been better. But there was a part of Joseph that had to have been relieved that he was away from this woman, because she was, she was just obsessed. So here he is in prison. And after he interprets truthfully, successfully, these two dreams, let's pick up in verse 1. How long has he been in prison now? 2 more years. By then he's probably figured out that the butler's not going to tell Pharaoh about him. Oh, I just didn't get around to it. Sorry, Joe. I've been so busy. I've had so much to do. It's all this wine tasting stuff. I forgot all about you. Yeah, okay, sure. I want you to notice in this dream, how many dreams does Pharaoh have? 2. One's about cows, and you gotta love dreaming about cows. There's just something about that. One's about cows, and one's about grain. 2 dreams. Are they similar at all? Are they different at all? Yeah, I want you to see that, because the author of this book is the same author of the book of Revelation. And I have told you over and over again, Revelation is not a mystery to be solved. Listen to the name of that book, Revelation, not mystery. And when John sees these visions, there are 7 of them. And they are different, and at the same time, they are the same. Just like Pharaoh's dreams. And what God is trying to tell us in Revelation, as he is here, is this is the same thing. What's happening is going to happen. I'm just putting a different perspective on it. In Genesis, there's 2 different perspectives. In Revelation, there's 7 different perspectives, but it's not 7 different interpretations. It's the same dream. It's the same vision. Okay? So, in a nutshell, the dreams start out how? Positive. Good things. Fat cows, fat grain. Sounds good. We all like to have fat cows. Well, they don't in Ireland because, they're trying to get rid of their cattle there. But here in America, we still have fat cows. We like fat cows. We like fat pigs. Bacon is one of our favorites. And then what happens?
You don't get fat.
Man, gross. Cannibalistic cows in your dream. What did he eat the night before that would make you do that? Well,
Maybe that's why he killed the baker.
there isn't anything he can do. He's tried magicians. I don't know, Kate, if he's tried comedians or not, but he's tried all kinds of people to try and get him an answer, and nobody can do it.
Because these dreams seem so obvious when you read them, even if you even if it was the first time you had ever read this. You have 7 fat cows that come up out of the Nile, and then they're eaten by 7 thin cows. Well, it seemed very obvious to me that you have 7 good years and 7 bad years. Then you have 7 huge grains of, your crops are fantastic for 7 years, and all of a sudden they all die off for 7 years. I mean, it's very obvious what, to me,
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah,
But
abundance.
then Potiphar called it all the wise men, and they can't say, what, you know, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? And I think God's just cracking up, you know?
Yeah, because who's the author of these dreams?
God,
God.
yeah.
And who gives these, he can make the simplest things difficult. And he can make the most difficult things simple. And we talk about wisdom, and sometimes children can be smarter than adults. And especially when they put things in perspective and just say what they see, and we think to ourselves, man, why didn't I see that? So here, we've got these people, they can't do it because God doesn't want them to do it. And then, Sally? Judy, do you like to read or not? Do you want to read or not? No. Okay, Sally, would you read verses 9 through 13?
Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dreams. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled."
Yes. Yes. Now, notice when he's talking to Pharaoh, he's mentioning that himself and the baker were what? Where were they? They were imprisoned. Get that word? Imprisoned. Prisoners. Notice how he describes Joseph. How- Who was what? A prisoner? No, he was a servant. Joseph was a prisoner. But he had so much leeway, he had so many privileges that all the other prisoners thought, he works here. I wonder where he goes home at night. He's got a bunk, 2 cells down. What's wrong with you? Yeah, they look at Joseph and they don't see him as a prisoner. And he was. And what did Joseph tell that butler to say if he ever got a chance to speak? What was he supposed to tell Pharaoh? Not that he could interpret dreams. He said, tell Pharaoh what?
Unjustly imprisoned.
I don't belong here. I'm not a servant, for crying out loud. I'm a prisoner, and I've been wrongly imprisoned. I'm innocent. Have you ever heard that before? I'm innocent. Get me out of here. He never mentions any of that to Pharaoh. He just said, hey, this guy can interpret dreams. Okay. Pauline? Verses 14 through 24.
So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 cows came up, scrawny, very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. So they looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain this to me.
Now look at verse 14 and tell me what you see that seems out of place. Why would they incorporate that in this verse? What does that have to do with the story? Yes. Now, changing the clothes, I get that. Whoa. Don't go to Pharaoh. You've had those clothes on, Joseph, for 2 years. So he shaved, which for a Hebrew is a no-no. Wow. You know, whatever happened to standing up for yourself, not, giving in to people who've got this woke philosophy. I mean, beards, facial hair, that's a part of my religion. I'm sticking with it. Why is Joseph changing? Anybody? A new career? Is that what you said? He's looking for a new career. Going to be a barber.
Joseph won't, or Pharaoh won't let him come to him unless he looks a little presentable. And in their mind, you shave not only the beard, but thinking about the
That look
movies
like
I've seen,
Yul
they
Brynner.
had- They mostly shave their heads too.
Yeah. Yeah. What? Yes. And there's something here that we're going to see probably next week because we're close to the end. And I got 2 kids in Ohio that are betting right now on when we're going to quit. So, I'm going to make them sweat a little bit. But he gives in to a physical thing. I mean, this wasn't even, there's nothing in the scripture about this yet because Moses hadn't been born. But to shave so that you could be presentable, to have an audience, so that in the audience, once he gets it, the first words out of Joseph's mouth are what?
Can't do it, but God can.
Yes. Boom. The glory of God again. No, Pharaoh didn't care about God. All I want you to do is interpret this. And he says, I can't do it. Wow. What do you think Pharaoh's heart went as soon as Joseph said, I can't do it? But, yeah. Put the but in there quick. I can't do it, but. Gives God the glory, and now you've got an opportunity to witness. So, we're done.